So, to make homemade bacon, the question is, why even bother? Why put all the work into making your own bacon and when you just go to the store and buy some? The issue is you can make bacon exactly the way you want. If you like it saltier, you can make it saltier. If you like it thicker, you can make it thicker. If you would like it sweeter, make it sweeter. It's also cheaper, way cheaper than buying the store-bought, particularly for back or Canadian bacon. Also, it is easy to do. If I can do it, anybody can. Plus which, trust me, you make your own bacon, you'll have a lot of friends. People will be coming around asking for your bacon. But the main real reason is it's way better than store-bought bacon. So, are there any questions about why you want to make bacon? I'm assuming because you're here that you want to make bacon, but is there any questions or comments you'd like to make about why you want to make bacon? If so, just put it in there. Okay, no questions from Bill, and I'm assuming Norm doesn't have any either. So, now, how did bacon first come about? The history of bacon is pretty simple. In the old days, people used to pack salt around meat to preserve it. It drew moisture out, and the meat didn't go bad as quickly. But the old mineral salts they used in those days were contaminated with nitrates and nitrates, which gave the red color and traditional taste we know of bacon today. Later on, or from different cultures, people would hang meat over smoke to keep the bugs away and help preserve it and not let the bugs get into it. And that's what got us to where bacon currently is today. There's three main bacon types that have been developed around the world. There's side or belly bacon, which is cut from the belly of a pig and is what we mostly think of as bacon. Then there's buckboard bacon, which is from a pork butt roast or a pork shoulder roast, which are the same thing, by the way, and has a little bit more fat in it than back bacon, but less than belly bacon. And then there's Canadian or back bacon. Now, it's called back bacon in Canada if it's made out of a pork loin. It's called Canadian bacon in the States. The only place in the world that doesn't call pork loin bacon Canadian bacon is Canada. Go figure. The technique for all three bacons are the same. You don't have to learn a different method for them. It's just different cuts of meat. So we'll start with the first cut of meat to make most commonly make bacon out of is pork belly. Pork belly is called bacon, belly bacon, side bacon, and streaky bacon, depending on what country you're in. Pork shoulder or butt is called buckboard bacon, buck bacon, or hillbilly bacon in different parts of the world. Pork loin, as I said, Canadian or back bacon. Now there's two ways, before we get into that, are there any questions in which different kinds of meat you can use? There's basically two different ways to cure your bacon. There's wet curing and dry curing. Both make really good bacon. It's just a matter of personal preference. I think the texture of dry curing is a bit better, so it's a method that I use and the method we're going to discuss today. Dry curing involves mixing a sugar or sweet substance with salt and a curing salt called prod powder number 1 that we'll talk more about later. And then you rub those on the surface of the meat and let it soak in. Wet curing is almost the same, but it mixes the same ingredients in water, and then you push the bacon under the water and let it soak in a brine, they call it, with those ingredients. Now, to prepare the meat to start making bacon depends on what kind of meat you're going to use. If you're using a pork belly, it usually comes with a skin on the bacon, and you have to take that off the pork belly to make your bacon. And just get a really sharp knife and slowly slice it under the edge of the bacon, and then sort of peel the skin back and keep working your way back until you've totally taken the skin off of the pork belly. And then it's ready to make bacon out of. Now, if you're going to be making buckboard bacon out of pork shoulder and you have a whole pork shoulder, you've got to take the skin off the same as you did with the belly bacon. But there'll also be a large bone that runs through the center of the pork shoulder. And once you get the skin off, you can, of course, cut any extra fat off if you want a bit leaner, or leave the fat on, but then cut down to that bone and slowly work your knife around it to take the bone out. And once you've got the bone totally removed from the pork shoulder, you need to get it into a thin slab like you would get from the belly bacon. If it's too thick, it won't cure well. So take the thick, meaty portion and cut down the middle of it to sort of open it up and make a long, wide, flat piece of pork. And then cut the pork into a couple of pieces just because it's easier to do your bacon in smaller pieces. Now for pork loin, it's way easier. Pork loin doesn't have any skin on it. It's usually got the fat quite well trimmed. You can take more off if you want to make it really lean. All you have to do is cut it into nice, easy pieces to work with. Now to make bacon, you're going to make up what they call a curing mixture, which has 3 ingredients. It has salt, and when you apply salt to the surface of the meat, it draws the liquid out of the meat, which gives a firmer bacon and gives part of the cure. You have sugar, which balances the salty flavor. If you made bacon without any sweetener, it would taste like salt pork. It would not be very pleasant. It can be sugar, brown sugar, maple syrup, molasses, or any mixture of those. And then a curing salt, which is a mixture of salt and sodium nitrite and acts as a preservative. Curing salt is commonly known as Prague powder #1. It's also known as pink salt #1, Instacure #1, or a whole bunch of other brand names. The important thing to do is to look at the package and make sure that it has 93.75% salt and 6.25% sodium nitrate. It must be that ratio. It's very important. Now, what the curing salt does is it gives the meat the pink color and the bacon taste, but more important, it inhibits bacterial growth. If you introduce nitrates into the meat, you can cook it at low temperatures for a long period of time without the meat going bad. If you did not have those nitrates, the meat could develop dangerous bacteria and toxins during the long, slow smoking process. So it's important that you use enough of the curing salt, but you must not use too much. If you use too much curing salt, it is bad for you. It can have quite significant health ramifications, so make sure you use the exact amount. Are there any questions on curing salt or the curing mixture to this point? Okay, I'm going to go ahead then. Now, there's a formula for the curing mix, and it's based on the weight of the meat. For 1 kilogram of pork after trim, you use 30 milliliters, 25.8 grams of brown sugar, or 15 milliliters, 19.2 grams of kosher salt, and 2.3 milliliters, or 3 grams of Prague powder #1. Now, I'll be sending this to you later. Don't be worried about writing it down madly. I'm going to send you a link to this video so you can see it again. Now, if you're from the part of the world that is behind the rest of us brilliant people and still use pounds, in American measures, I've included them here, and the ratio is the same, but measured by teaspoons or ounces to pounds. Now, in calculating how much of the cure mix to use, it is based on the weight of the pork, you'll notice. So if you had 1 kilogram or 2 kilograms or whatever, you have to multiply the weight of the meat times the cure ingredient. For example, if we had 2.5 kilograms of meat, you would need 2.5 times the formula. So it's 2.5 times 30 milliliters of sugar, and that equals 75 milliliters. If you're working in pounds and you have 3 pounds of meat, you would do 3 times the 2.5 teaspoons of sugar, or 7.5 teaspoons. It's pretty simple. Just multiply the weight times the amount in the table I gave you before. Is there any questions on calculating your amount of cure? Okay, Bill, please type your question in, Bill, and we'll get into her. Thanks for asking, Bill. We're not doing anything with regards to wet curing at this time. It's a totally different thing, and the calculation is totally different for wet. The calculation is only for dry curing. Does that answer your question, Bill? Okay, we'll carry on then if there's no more questions. Now, once you've made up the cure mix, you have to apply it to the pork. Now, if you're doing a whole bunch of pieces of pork, do the measurement and the calculation for one piece of pork at a time. You want the exact ratio for each piece so you don't get too much nitrites or too little in any one piece. Put the meat onto a plate and then sprinkle the curing mix over it. Now, the reason you put it on a plate is to catch any that falls off. You can use a baking tray or just a large plate because you want to make sure you save all the cure. And then you have to put the meat into what they call a curing chamber. Now, that can be any non-reactive, which means non-metallic except for stainless steel container. Use a plastic food-grade container, or I find the easiest is to use a Ziploc bag or a vacuum sealer bag. But you want one for each piece of meat. So what you want to do is to take the meat and put it in your curing chamber. Here I'm using a vacuum sealer bag. And you put the meat into it, and what you want to do is make sure that you also scrape off any of the cure that fell onto the plate and any that's left in your bowl. And you want to make sure you get it all into the bag. Now with a Ziploc bag, you just have to seal it up. With a vacuum bag, I like to seal it but not take the air out because we're going to be massaging stuff into it later. If you're using, say, a plastic tray, make sure you get all the material into the tray, and you'll be covering it with a plastic wrap later. But you want to make sure you get as much as possible of your curing mix into the curing chamber. Are there any questions on what kind of curing chamber I used or anything to this point? Okay, I'll carry on. Just type in question and we'll go back if you get there. Now, once it's in it, the bacon has to sit in the cure for long enough for the cure to soak in all the way through the piece of pork. Now, cure penetrates 1/4 of an inch or 6 millimeters deep each day on each side. So it's a total of a 1/2 inch of 13 millimeters in total into the bacon. So in theory, a 1-inch piece of pork would cure in 2 days. But that's not quite so true. There's harder parts of fat. There's more dense parts of pork. It can take a little bit less or more. So you want to give it a longer period of time to make sure you get a really good cure. Now, I go quite extreme and use a really long time for my cure. So I use a formula of 3 days for each inch or 26 millimeters of pork plus 2 days. So a 2-inch thick piece would take 8 days, which is 2 times 3, 3 days per inch plus 2. Now, other people use a lot less curing time. A common one is 2 days per inch of the pork plus 2 days. I just find by giving a longer time, I get a really solid, consistent cure. But you can use less. Other people do. Is there any question on how long to cure your bacon for? Okay, thank you. Now, once it's in the curing chamber, if it's in a bag, a Ziploc bag or a vacuum bag, you want to pick it up every day or two and just massage the cure into the pork. If it's in a tray, you want to turn it over every couple of days and rub any of the contents of the tray over it. The bacon will give off some liquid, but it really varies depending on the piece of pork you used, how it was processed. So if you've got a lot of liquid, don't worry about it. If you've got a little bit of liquid, don't worry about it. It will change a lot between pieces of meat. And a lot of that liquid, as it sits in the cure, will soak back into the bacon, so don't worry too much if it kind of goes away. Now, once you've soaked it for the period of time that you're going to be curing, you want to take it out of the bag and put it in some cold water for about an hour and change the water once. What this does is it removes the surface salt. Now, you will read some people say that if your bacon's a bit too salty at this point, you can slice a piece off and fry it and see if it's too salty. You can soak it in the water for the hour to take some of the salty flavor over. It doesn't work. Remember, it takes a day for it to soak in a quarter of an inch. It takes a full day for it to soak out a quarter of an inch. If your bacon's too salty, the only thing you can do to really kind of help it out is to boil it before you fry it. But it's much better to just stick carefully to the formula I gave you, and you won't have to worry about it. So is there any questions about curing the bacon in the container or soaking it to this point? Okay. So, now we're getting ready to smoke our bacon. It's really important that if you're going to smoke your bacon, that the surface of the bacon must be dry. If it's wet, then ash and different poor tasting chemicals will stick to the bacon that you don't want. You get a much better flavor if the surface is dry. This is referred to as a pellicle. If you touch it and rub it, it should feel a little sticky. And there's three main ways of getting it dry. One is to put it in a modern refrigerator overnight uncovered. That dries it out. A second is to put it in front of a fan until it dries out, take a couple of hours. And another is to put it in a 130-degree oven or smoker without smoke until the surface dries off. They're all important if you're going to smoke the bacon. But what we're talking about that is, do you need to smoke the bacon? The answer is no. Several countries don't smoke their bacon. It tastes fine, but it doesn't have the smoked flavor. If you've ever had pea meal bacon, it's usually not smoked. Tastes great, but doesn't have any smoky flavor. If you're not smoking, do everything the same for the rest of the recipe, just do it in your oven. Now, there's two ways to smoke your bacon. There's cold smoking and there's hot smoking. Cold smoking applies no heat to the bacon, just smoke for as long as you want. So the bacon stays totally uncooked. Some people smoke for days to get a really strong smoke flavor. The only problem with this method is the bacon will have a great flavor and it'll cook great, but raw bacon is harder to slice. Now, hot smoking is smoking it in a smoker and applying heat to it, and it can't be in as long as it can be in cold smoke, because once it's cooked, it's cooked. You can take the bacon actually even to the point where you could just slice it and eat it, but some say that hot smoking doesn't give as good a texture as cold smoking. I find them both pretty good, but it's definitely easier to slice. Now, you can go to a hybrid between the two, and that's where you start with a cold smoke for as long as you want. You can go a day if you want it really strong, and then hot smoke it so that you can cook it so you can eat it cold and slice it easier. That's a combination of the two. Now, an interesting thing to know about cold smoking is you don't need a commercial smoker to cold smoke. The old days, they used to just build a wooden house and build a fire underneath it and let the smoke come through. But these days, there are smoke generators available. There's several different kinds. I've got two pictured here. One uses sawdust or pellets to smoke around a snake shape. Another uses a tube smoker to put pellets in and smoke. And you can put these in your gas barbecue, or I even know one guy took a big clay pot and turned it over on it and smokes his bacon in that. You just need a container to hold some of the smoke in but still let air through, and you can cold smoke for as long as you want in anything. Hot smoking, on the other hand, does require you to apply heat. You can use pellet smokers, electric smokers, whatever, as long as they can give you a temperature between 180 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. The low temperature, as opposed to baking or at 350 or whatever, should allow more time in the smoke. And you will want to smoke it to an internal temperature between 130 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit or 54 to 66 degrees centigrade. That is to get the easy slicing. If you heat it over 145 degrees Fahrenheit or 63 degrees centigrade, it's safe to eat cold. You've actually killed any bacteria in it. To get that internal temperature, it's really easier if you can find a remote thermometer to put into the meat and keep track of the internal temperature. So I've covered a lot in smoking here. Dave asked a question. I'm sorry I missed on it. Dave, he asked if it was soak 1/2 hour and then change. Yes, that's what you do with the soaking. Now, is there any other questions on the smoking of the bacon or anything else up to date? Okay, we'll carry on. Now, the double smoking is a version of the combination. When I do a double smoke, I do it for about 4 hours. You can do it for less. Now, what kind of wood should you use to smoke your bacon? This requires arguments among smokers anywhere. Apple gives a mild smoke taste. You hear about apple-cured bacon, and maple is big in Canada and the northeastern states. Competition blend, which is a mixture of different woods, gives a really neutral but good smoke taste, and hickory is the classic with a really big, strong smoke hit. Now, so you smoked your bacon, and assuming you hot smoked, if you cold smoked it, it's just ready to go. If you've hot smoked it, bring it in, put it in the fridge overnight to let the smoke even out. My preference, Dave. I got to admit, I prefer a double smoke. I like to put my smoke in the smoker for, in the cold smoke for a few hours, and then out and back in the hot smoke. My wife prefers just the hot smoke because she doesn't like the smoky. As to which kind of wood I prefer hickory, but my wife prefers apple, so I obviously prefer apple. Does that answer your question, Dave? Okay. So once you've let the bacon rest overnight, you do not have to go out and buy a big fancy slicer. A good slicing knife will let you cut bacon just fine. Of course, a rotary slicer is quicker, but the disadvantage of most of the inexpensive rotary slicers is you can only cut lengths of bacon up to about 5 or 6 inches. So you'll end up with shorter pieces of bacon. I would encourage you to cut your bacon thicker than you get it in the store. They cut it thin so it looks like you're getting more pieces. But if you try cutting 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch, I think you'll find your bacon is a lot tastier and has a lot better texture. And that's it. We've now made your first bacon. And if you want to take everything I've said up till now and bring it down into a concentrated level, basically what you're doing is you're taking a piece of pork, you're mixing 3 ingredients together, you're rubbing it on the pork, and then letting it rest for a number of days. You're smoking it or not, and then slicing it up. That's all there is to making bacon. Are there any questions on just the basic of making bacon? Then I got a few suggestions for things for you to try after. Okay. Now here's just a few things that I throw out to you that you might want to try after you've done your first basic bacon. You can rub spices on the surface before putting it in the fridge or in front of the fan to dry. You can try cracked pepper, piri-piri spice, chipotle, crushed chilies, or anything else your imagination could give to you. You can substitute molasses, maple sugar, or maple syrup for some of the brown sugar in the curing mix, just to give it a little bit different flavor. You can reduce the brown sugar and inject maple syrup or molasses thinned with water into the bacon before curing with a big syringe. Now, I will tell you that you cannot make your bacon taste like the maple bacon in the store by injecting maple syrup. They don't inject maple syrup, they inject artificial maple flavor. You can't buy artificial maple flavor. If you want to do that, buy some and inject it to your bacon. I find it. Yeah. But it's up to you. So is there any more questions or you want to do? I'd be happy to answer them right now. You can also email me or buy my book. Now, this beginner's book doesn't have about making bacon in it. My second book will, but it will teach you the basics of using a smoker and smoking meat. Oh, I got Norm's question and I missed it. Yes, I did. When you cold smoke and then hot smoke, he asked if you can leave it in the fridge overnight before going to the hot smoke, or can you go right in from the hot smoke? Can you go, my understanding of this question is, when you do a cold smoke and then a hot smoke, do you cold smoke, refrigerator, hot smoke, refrigerator, or do you do cold smoke, hot smoke, refrigerator? I have to admit I prefer cold smoke, refrigerator overnight, hot smoke, refrigerator overnight, because it gives a really deep smoke flavor. But you can just go right from the cold to the hot smoke. I just don't think it gives as good a result. Does that answer your question, Norm? So thanks to all of you. I really appreciate it. I'd also really appreciate it if you could take the time to email me with any suggestions for improvement, anything you like, anything you didn't like, and if questions come to mind, feel free to get a hold of me. I will be posting this seminar to YouTube, and I'll send you a link to the YouTube posting so you can go over it again later. And I thank you for your time. Now, Norm's asked me if you have to cut the skin off belly bacon. No, you don't. Some places leave it on, but I find it gets hard in the curing process and the smoking process, and I prefer to take it off, but you can leave it on. That answer your question, Norm? Thank you all, and I wish you all a good night. I really appreciate your help.